Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.
Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com. Of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview film professionals to discuss their work, and this week, I'm joined by Tim Squyres, whose work includes Gosford Park, Life of Pi, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and more recently, Deep Water, just to name a few. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Great to be here.
I guess my first, there's so much that we could talk about. I do want to talk because I talked to Eugene, who did the sound on Life of Pi.
Eugene Garrity, yes.
Yeah. And he was saying that because you guys were shooting, they shot in water tanks, they shot in lots of noisy areas, a lot of scenes had unusable audio. So it was the dialogue was very bad. And at the same time,
everything we shot in the wave tank was unusable.
Yeah. And on top of that, you also had a lot of VFX. So how did you, when you're cutting something like that, where you have tough audio to figure out and VFX that's not there, the audio is probably going to be all replaced. How do you figure out, what's the best take and, how to assemble it when a lot of it's missing in a sense?
Well, with the audio, I was assembling as we shot. We were shooting in Taiwan. And at the end of the shoot, I had most scenes pieced together with the production sound, which was unusable, but they did record it. Yeah. So you could hear what he was saying. And I took the sound recordist and Suraj Sharma, and we went into a conference room at the place where we were working in Taiwan, put up sound blankets everywhere, and redid most of his lines right there.
Oh, wow.
While he was still in character. So, I had the scene in the Avid. I would play the line for him and then he'd do it. And I'd play it for him and he'd do it. And I'd play it for him and he'd do it. And so we got pretty good replacement audio for most of the film right at the end of production.
Wow. And did that end up in the final film, or did they redo it again? Wow.
No, most of that went in because it was, he wasn't a very experienced actor, but he was right in character. And so that was very good. And it was, recorded very high quality. So we did re-record a bunch of stuff later, like his voiceovers and things, but most of it we got right then.
Wow.
We then, of course, had to create the sound of the ocean and the wind and all that. So, we did right from the days that I assembled the scene. We put in backgrounds and made it sound pretty good. So that wasn't a distraction because I had pretty competent sound right from the beginning. We had a big library of Tiger sounds, both from production, but most of the ones that we have from production weren't good because the Tigers that they recorded the Tigers somewhat just clean, but also we recorded a bunch on a boat. We had a boat on a gimbal in a Tiger pen, but the gimbal made noise. So a lot of that wasn't really usable, but it told us what kind of noises a Tiger should be making. Yeah. So we were able to, have decent Tiger sounds even right from the very beginning.
Wow.
Visual effects was more of a deal. We shot it in a wave tank, so it's just distracting looking at a wave tank. So again, right from the beginning in editorial, we replaced the backgrounds as quickly as we could. Now, not well. It wasn't anything like the final ones, but we had a library of both still images and moving images of oceans and skies. And just to be able to look at something that wasn't the wave tank.
Yeah.
The issue is also just the Tiger. For the Tiger, we had still models of the Tigers that I could put in because you need to know what the Tiger's doing. And again, right from the assembly, we did that. We prevised everything for that whole section with the Tiger on the boat. So I had them give us the Tiger out of the previs, just the Tiger on green, so we could key that in and put it on. So we had everything blocked out in terms of where the Tiger was and not seeing the wave tank and hearing competent sound right from the get-go. Because otherwise, what are you doing? We had to do that with the same thing with Hulk. They had a model of the Hulk, a 3D model, on a turntable on green from different angles, and same with the planes and the helicopters and everything. And so, otherwise you're just panning across the rocks and you don't know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
So in order to do the basic storytelling, we had all that in very, very early.
I would like to know, because you've worked with Ang Lee for quite a while.
All but one of his films.
And one of the quotes from him is he says he likes to work with you because you guys disagree a lot. So I was wondering if you could, elaborate on that, or
of course we don't disagree a lot. We disagree. We agree 95% of the time. It's just the last 5% is what we spend our time talking about. So, if we agreed 100% of the time, I wouldn't be helping him. It would be a waste of time, because you need some, unless there's some give and take, some push that makes you explore new options, you don't progress. So you need to disagree a little bit, but we fundamentally agree about everything. Just, all those things that we agree about, we don't need to talk about, because, I understand his style of filmmaking. I like the work that he does. And so, most of it just falls together, and it's that last 5% that we need to discuss. And so, I think he was speaking in shorthand when he said that, because we agree about most things, but it's the rest that we spend our time discussing.
Interesting. Now you also worked with, Angelina Jolie on Unbroken, and I'm wondering, you've worked with so many different, directors, Altman and what have you, and I'm wondering, how do you get on the same page with the director when you're starting a film, right? You're coming in, you're meeting this new director, and you need to sort of get in the same wavelength as them. How do you like to approach that?
Yeah, when you're starting with a director you've never worked with before, that's one of the tricky things. You meet initially before they start shooting. A lot of films I've only met with the director once, maybe twice before we start shooting. So, you see during that meeting, you kind of discuss the film and the approach to editing. And that's usually the meeting before you've been officially hired. So, you're both deciding whether this is a relationship that you think is going to work. And I've been in those meetings where I've decided it's probably not going to work, and I haven't done those films. And I've probably been in meetings where the director decided the same thing, and I haven't done those films either. So, but it can be tricky, during production. Usually I'm not where they're shooting. In Unbroken, you mentioned they were shooting in Australia, and I was in New York. Even Rachel Getting Married for Jonathan Demme, he was in Connecticut, and I was at home in New Jersey. So, we didn't talk a whole lot. We communicate during production the way because I'm cutting, if we start shooting on Monday, I start cutting on Tuesday. And I send those scenes back with notes. And if there's an issue, we kind of, I find out from that whether I'm on the same page with the director. Usually I hear very little back, which is good. But then, when you sit down in the room together, you got to figure out what's the way to work. How are we going to get through the day? In production, there's a producer and a first AD cracking the whip, and there's a whole set of procedures and lots of people. And then the director comes in the editing room, and it's just the two of you sitting in a room, and you can sit and tell jokes all day. I mean, there's no structure besides what we choose to impose on what we're doing. So in the case with a director who is not terribly experienced, generally I would sort of take the lead. Always the director can take the lead if they want to, but I would say, let's do this. One thing that I do is when I assemble scenes, I always assemble several versions. I never do just to a scene just once. That's one of the nice changes since the film days, when you really could only cut one version of the scene because you just had the work print. So often, we just start with scene one and say, well, here's what's in the assembly, but then here's this version, and here's this version. And that's a good way to just kind of get the conversation started. But eventually you learn with this director how you're going to work. And it's different with everybody. Robert Altman, first of all, the assembly on Gosford Park was really good. It was very long, but it was a very hard film to assemble. But he was shooting in England, I was in the United States. And so there were no problems. The issue was, how do we get an hour of running time out of it? But beyond that, there was a lot we could do, but it was there were no problems. But I never saw Altman more than maybe 4 hours a day, whereas Ang Lee's sitting next to me 10 hours a day. With Jonathan Demme, what Jonathan Demme needs is different from what Ang Lee needs. And just you kind of figure out what the approach is going to be. And it depends on the material, it depends on what kind of problems you have, and it depends on the personalities of the two people in the room. So it's just something you have to figure out.
Well, I was bringing up Unbroken because I was thinking, as an actress, I was wondering what kind of sort of sensibilities she brought to her directing style, and how did you work with her in the cutting room?
Yeah, she was. I really admired Angie. She, she knew what she knew, and she knew what she didn't know, and she never pretended to know what she didn't know, which a lot of people would. She had Roger Deakins shot the film, who's tremendous. He got I think his 13th or 14th Oscar nomination on that film. So, and Alexander Desplat was our composer, and, she had picked some very good people to work with. And so she was very tuned into the performances. Although she didn't shoot a lot of takes. So that kind of limited, she really wanted to keep on schedule. So that kind of limited the range of how much we could do with performance. But in terms of, her focus was more on the performance and the dramatic rather than the structural aspects. Because there's some scenes in that film that are complex in terms of how it's shot and how it's blocked. Roger Deakins and I kind of took care of most of that. The performance should never be subservient to, your angles. But there just weren't a lot of problems in that way. So what she was good at was really keeping track of the emotional flow and how the performances lined up. But with things like sound, she knew that she didn't have a lot of experience with sound. And we, the first time we did a mix on it, we were doing a mix for a temp mix for a preview, and the mixers kind of had their marching orders from the studio, and they started without us and did the whole first scene. And then we came in and watched it, and she said, I don't like this at all. This is all wrong. I don't know how to make it right. Tim, stay here and make it right. And she left. And, and she came back a couple hours later and said, yes, that's right. And the mixers were happy too, because it just was a different approach. But she knew she didn't know how to fix that problem. But she knew she also had hired people who did know how to fix that problem.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like the mixers would be happy with that, because you don't want to do a ton of work and only to have the person unhappy and have to do it all over again. And
well, also often with a mix, with sound mixing, it takes a little bit of time to get everybody on the same page. These are mixers I had never worked with before. She never worked with before. And, just to understand what the aesthetic of this film is going to be. And the first scene in that movie, it's a long, complicated scene. It's a bombing run. These American pilots are doing a bombing run on a Japanese base on an island. And then they're chased, and it's a long scene, and there's no music. The studio wanted to kill me for that, because it's an action scene. Why isn't there action music? But there isn't music until the very end. And it's not action music at all. It's about it takes us into his memories. Did the same thing in Life of Pi for the shipwreck. Again, no music until the very end, and it's about him feeling the loss of his family, not about the action. And both those films were nominated for Best Sound, and neither of them would have been if I had put music on those scenes.
Yeah,
because
maybe Best Score.
Those were both real showcases for. And Life of Pi won for Best Score.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's, you know, she was great in being able to, you know, she knew what she knew, and she was very good at that, and you know, relied on other people to get her the rest of the way on the other things.
Now, you mentioned earlier, you know, interviewing directors and directors interviewing you, but what is it you look for in a project? Like, what excites you when you get a script?
Well, the first thing is you read the script and think, is this good material for a movie? Does it interest me? I mean, there are good movies that I'm not the right editor for. You know, it just, does the material grab me in some way? You know, one thing you look for is, I mean, there's a lot of things that can make a script interesting. You know, a script like Sense and Sensibility, it's a terrific script. And one of the things that was so great about it is, in that there are a lot of people keeping secrets from other people. You know, there are a lot of big, complex scenes, but somebody says something and it means something to this person, it means something else to this person, it means something else to this person. And that kind of emotional and intellectual complexity is really appealing. Because from an editor, you kind of go, oh, this is going to be a good meaty scene, because there's always some place to cut to, because there's something really fascinating going on here. Those are the kinds of scenes I really, really look for. You know, a film where there's the whole film or a section of the film where you're following different stories or different characters, you're intercutting between characters in different places. You know, an extreme example of that would be Syriana, which is 4 stories. It was originally 5. We dropped 1 completely. Or even in the ice storm, where the night of the ice storm, we're in 3 different places, 4 different places, bouncing around. You kind of look at that and go, okay, we should add 2 months to the schedule, because we're going to play around with that. Maybe it'll work just fine the way it is, but most likely we're going to rearrange quite a bit. And, you know, that can be good. That can be really fascinating. You know, in Syriana, we spent enormous amounts of time just moving scenes around. The scenes actually were fine.
Yeah.
You know, well, a bunch of the scenes hardly changed from the assembly, but we changed the order of the scenes endlessly.
Yeah.
So, you know, those kinds of structural things, sometimes you just go, you know, you worry if too much is being explained by the narration. I mean, not the narration, but the text of the script, and not in dialogue. Sometimes you see that and you go, okay, I understand it reading the script, but how in the world is an audience supposed to understand it if nobody said it? You know, this is too deep subtext that's never becomes text.
Yeah.
It becomes text in the script because you wrote it that way. But, you know, those are the kinds of mistakes you look for and problems you look for. And those are the things you bring up in that meeting to see if the director is aware of them and how they plan to deal with them.
Interesting. Now, you've also worked a lot in documentaries.
Yeah.
What do you take from your work as a fiction editor that translates over for you into the editing process of docs?
Well, I mean, in either case, you're trying to, I mean, they're very different. And I was more of a documentary editor first before doing narrative. So, you know, the big thing in editing documentaries, you're still trying to, either you're trying to tell a story or you're trying to lay out a sequence of ideas to make a point. And the big difference is you have to tell the truth. You know, you have to be truthful, which, you know, some people in documentaries take more liberties with that than others. But, you know, that's not an issue in features. Nobody's there to, I mean, they're there to be told a story that isn't true. Keeping a close eye on, are we explaining ourselves and are we being honest? I mean, you can never tell the whole story in a documentary. It would be 40 hours long. But you can, am I representing what this person said properly? In a way that's honest, that reflects what they meant.
Yeah.
You have to think about all those kinds of things in a documentary, which you just don't have to think about. So beyond, just knowing how to use the equipment and how to put scenes together, I would say the two are quite different for me. I mean, I enjoy both, but it's, what you're attempting to do is quite different. I mean, often in a documentary, you can do things that are emotional, and the way that you structure things emotionally in a narrative, maybe you can find some way to use those same kinds of things in a documentary. In a documentary, you have to think, oh, am I being manipulative? Is this fair? Whereas in a feature, people are there to be manipulated, just in a way that doesn't feel, overt.
Yeah.
But in a documentary, you always have to be checking yourself, going, is this right? Is this fair? So yeah, I find the two quite different.
Interesting. Now, I have one last question for you. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film to watch?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and there's nothing guilty about it at all. One of my favorite films to watch that I've seen a bunch of times is Terrence Malick's second film, Days of Heaven.
Okay.
One of the films that made me, it was when I was in high school, and I had to go by myself because I couldn't get any of my friends to go see it. But it was one of the films that sort of started me thinking about going into movies, because I didn't, that was not my intention at all.
Yeah.
I planned to do something else, but just the way that film is put together, and I thought it was just perfectly constructed and conceived, and then you find out later how much of that was done in editorial. It's a very inspiring film in that way. So yeah, I'll say Days of Heaven.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Sure.
And that's it for this week. Make sure to check us out on filmmakeru.com, and of course follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Raquel. Thanks for watching.
Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.